how people are navigating identity and well-being at work. I'm your host, Axelle, and my co-host is Selma Limsadi. This season, we're exploring how people stay grounded at work during uncertain times. Our guest today is Bianca Errigo, founder of HumanOS. Before she was building platforms and working with organizations on sustainable performance, she burnt out. And it's that experience and everything she had to unlearn to come back from it that shapes everything she now does. Today, we're asking a question that might be uncomfortable for some of us to sit with. What if the thing that looks like high performance from the outside is actually someone running on empty?
Yes, Bianca, welcome. And before we talk about organizations and research, I'd love to start with your story. You've been very open about experiencing burnout yourself. What was happening in your life and work at that time?
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much both for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you both, and I think you're both such amazing humans and love what you're doing and this space you're creating. So yeah, really excited for this conversation. So yeah, if we go back to my burnout journey, I guess it began in my early 20s when I was fresh out of university. I had just graduated in psychology. I had dreams of being a clinical psychologist. And very shortly after I graduated, found out my father had a terminal illness and only had a few months left to live. As a result of that, I had to get a job very quickly. And so I started my career in technology sales. I was on a sales floor of 800 people. I was one of very, very few women. I was one of the youngest in the company, and thrown into this environment in which I never had any dreams or desires to be in, and was in this job role that felt very unnatural to me and wasn't exactly the life plan I had for myself, which I think happens to so many of us, particularly at the start of our careers. So the combination of the uncertainty around my dad and going through my dad's illness and not knowing how long we had together, and then also being in this really competitive, fast moving, driven environment and throwing everything I had into that role on this mission to make money. And that really was my only motivation. I wanted to make money to buy him his health or buy him a Ferrari. And so a combination of those two things together really are what led to the complete breakdown of my mental and physical well-being.
I'm so sorry to hear that you had to experience that. And yeah, I think, those experiences really shape us, especially like losing a parent. Looking back now, were there like early signs that you were moving into that survival mode that you didn't recognize at the time?
Yeah, I think a whole plethora of them really. And now having the knowledge I have and going back and doing the qualifications and the coaching, it to me now is something that I just know. But actually back then, as a person without that knowledge and without those skills and without those tools, there was so much that I ignored mentally and physically. I guess on the mental side, everything we can all probably connect with when we're in periods of what we just think is more stressful periods, I guess, such as you are low on energy, you're more forgetful, you have less patience, you have less empathy, you are starting to move in just more of a survival type way in which you're chasing your to-do list. You're just sometimes just trying to put one foot in front of the other. And so the human skills that you would otherwise have sort of put to one side because you just don't have the energy to be able to use them. Then on a physical perspective, a lot of signs now, and I'm so in tune with my body, but again, I wasn't then, and that's not to shame anyone who isn't in any way, because it's often not until we do go through these things that we realize the importance of actually listening to our bodies, which is something we hear so much. But what does that actually mean? And to me back then, it didn't mean anything. I didn't really understand it. But again, it started with stomach pains, and it started with joint pains, and then it started with acid reflux, and then over time, actually what it led to was my hospitalization and my stomach walls no longer working and my cortisol being so high. I couldn't sleep lying down because the reflux was so painful, and fibromyalgia, and sitting at my desk and it feeling like my teeth were falling out my head like someone had a screwdriver. And then like the aftermath of the anxiety and the depression. And so again, it starts really small, but then it compounds over time. And then for me, because it was such an extreme case, it was this whole like mental and physical combination of symptoms.
Was it like a physical manifestation of holding it together for so long, like a literal collapse?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was very psychosomatic to a degree, because especially when I was getting loads of tests and the doctors were constantly, they couldn't find anything wrong. And I was like, well, I'm telling you there's something wrong because I'm in pain and I can't sleep and I can't digest my food. So there like has to be something going on in my body. What's really, really interesting now is I've done so much work over the past 10 years or so to understand my body, understand my mind, and to regulate my emotions in a healthy way and to manage my stress as well as I can, which I absolutely do not always get perfectly, especially not running a startup. Like, let's be real, like we're all humans here trying our best. But what's really interesting to me is when I'm in like really high states of stress. It happened when I was raising investment. It's happened a few other times over the past year or so. Almost instantly when I'm in these situations, the exact same stomach pain comes back, despite I have none of those physical ailments anymore. And I've had endoscopies and I've had the scans, and I know I've got a healthier stomach than the average person my age now. And I've actually not just slowed the damage, I've reversed the damage. So there's actually no physical damage anymore. But when I'm in these situations, I get exactly the same physical pains, which just shows that like psychosomatic link between the brain and the body.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it's great that you managed to, solve it, even though it does come back at, very stressful times. And, what helped you come to that space? What helped you start rebuilding, after that burnout experience?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And for me, and I really believe it's important people hear this, because I didn't have the love to give to myself at that time. I didn't feel worthy enough. I wasn't able to give myself that self-compassion lens. And so I couldn't motivate myself to create change through loving myself enough. What actually motivated me was the love I had for my dad, and knowing that my dad had lost his health and then I was throwing my health away. And actually the motivation of owing it to him not to do that. So I think like it's really important for everyone to understand, like, even if you can't motivate yourself, like with your love and respect for yourself, that's okay, because it takes time to build that. But finding like what that initial motivation to create that first step of change is really, really important. So for me, it was him. And then it sounds super, super boring, but it started with like taking what I call, and what I've said to like thousands of clients at this point, is taking control of the controllables. Like when we feel so out of control, it's really important to create a sense of agency in what we can control. So for me, it was, okay, I need to start moving my body and exercising. Anyone who knows me, follows me, will know that's my absolute like crux. And I love my exercise still to this day.
You're a beast.
Yeah, I mean, it really, for me, it was like the only hour of my day I wasn't actually in pain, which is the irony of it. But now it's just like it's my pillar. It was my way of learning that I could do hard things, and it was my way of learning that I can be uncomfortable and be in discomfort and grow, and that mentality that just then folds into everything. So if it started with exercise, then that obviously leads into nutrition, which leads into sleep. So it was a very slow journey, and then becoming really quite health obsessed. The one thing that took me way too long, but again, that's a harsh way of looking at it, but one thing I do wish I had done earlier was speak, go to therapy, speak to people who loved me. I didn't have the tool of vulnerability at that point. And it's still something that doesn't come naturally to me, despite having conversations like this all of the time. It was really, really difficult. And still now, like when things are really, really tough, I tend to almost wait for them to be over before I start speaking about them. And again, it's just like understanding ourselves and what we can and can't do. But I think that's a big one that, and I always try and promote for others, is like, actually to talk and to share and to be vulnerable is actually to be really strong, not the opposite.
Yeah, I love that. You're so self-reflective, and it made you completely shift your whole life. Did it also make you reflect on how, workplaces affect people's well-being?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't believe, for the majority of workplaces, I don't believe they are built purposely to the detriment of people's well-being. A lot of workplaces, a lot of the environments that exist, they're not purposely like intentionally going out to make people unwell. I think it's through lack of awareness, it's through lack of education, it's through reactivity and not having the space and the clarity and the confidence to redesign these really outdated, archaic systems. The problem is now, when we look at things like burnout, anxiety, stress, depression, it's very rarely just about what's going on at work. We have such a complex society, such complex lives now. Everything is moving so quickly. We have this economic uncertainty, we have geopolitical conflict, we have the rise and the movement of AI. Like, there is so much going on in the world. We as individuals, we're fortunate enough to live in these developed countries, but everything is relative and people are worried. They're worried about, how do I pay my rent or my mortgage? They're worried about caregiving for their elderly relatives, their parents. They're worried about their children. They're worried about safety. Like, there's so much going on in the world. And so what we take into the workplace is already, we're coming in a place of fight and flight. We're coming in from a place of fear, from a place of stress. So then when you combine that with these really outdated, archaic environments that are not set up for human flourishing, the combination of those two things results in something that's hugely detrimental to human beings and their health. And I think that's the biggest reflection I took, is it's not one or the other. There's no good guy or bad guy, but the combination of these things is not to the benefit of human performance and human well-being.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Every time I hear your story, I'm so touched by it. And I think there's power in using yourself as a case study for building something that creates such positive change. And your experience eventually led you to build HumanOS, where you now work with leaders to rethink how work is designed. So let's zoom out of that for a moment. One of the ideas you explore in your work is that survival mode can look like high performance from the outside, right?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. I believe to be really common, particularly when we're thinking about high performance. We're often thinking about highly ambitious people, highly driven. And so their ability to, from the outside, everything looks fine. Targets are being hit, meetings are running smoothly, messages are being answered quickly, and the organization and the team, they're functioning. But actually underneath all of this, people are stressed, they're bracing, they're not operating from a place of creativity or engagement or innovation. And I'm careful, I don't want to make this like an AI episode, but in this technologically driven world we are in, and with this rise of AI and everything it can create, there has never been such an importance on human-based skills. And these are the things that are really lost when people are looking like they're high performing, but actually on the inside, they're quite usually the opposite.
Mm-hmm. And in the article we wrote together that we'll link in the show notes of this episode, you referenced some striking data that I'm going to read through some of them. And so, for instance, more than 150 million people across the European Union live with mental health conditions. The projected $6 trillion economic cost is a cost of mental health by 2030 globally.
Yeah.
That's immense. And
Yeah.
only 13% of European employees are currently engaged at work. When you look at these numbers together, what story do they tell us about how people are currently working?
Yeah, it's striking statistics. And ultimately, so we have more than 3.5 billion working adults now that will spend roughly 90,000 hours, or the equivalent of 45 years of their lives at work. And this number is increasing because not only is lifespan increasing, but so is health span. And obviously that's the one we really want to focus on as well, because there's no point living to 120 if it's only 60 well-lived years. But health span, lifespan are all increasing, so time in the workplace is likely also going to increase. And so this doesn't mean we all have to be skipping into work every day and really, really excited and super happy. And it doesn't even mean that everyone has to love their jobs. I think that's so overrated and so far from the reality of so many of our lives. But it does absolutely mean we have to have meaning and purpose and fulfillment. I actually think interest is far more important than happiness as such when it comes to a job. Happiness can be fleeting, but if you are doing work that genuinely interests you, that tends to be a pretty good predictor of long-term engagement and motivation. And so then when we sort of drill down deeper into these statistics, over 150 million people across Europe living with a mental health condition. I think it's 12 billion working days are lost every year due to anxiety or depression, costing up 1 trillion in productivity each year. The vast majority of individuals are experiencing moderate to high levels of stress. 60% of employees are now feeling anxious. Resilience is on the decline. Resilience under 30s is the highest it's ever been. I read somewhere, I think it was last week, that the average age of burnout is now 27, which to me is just crazy. These 27, we haven't even hit our stride yet. How are we burning out at that age? And I know that I was younger than that when I burnt out, but that to me is scary that this is becoming the normal. And then, so when we go then to that, well, okay, we link this then to the engagement piece. When we can see that these are all the challenges that we're having when it comes to mental well-being in the workplace. Engagement, I think it's globally 23%. Europe, like you said, Axel, 13%. UK, where I'm at, we're 10%. And so, again, the vast majority of individuals, they are there, but they're not there. But when you look at, well, what's going on with mental health, it's really no surprise. So then there's massive opportunity, actually, that if we can start creating these environments that both look after humans as human beings and an environment that's conducive to engagement and performance and innovation, then the byproduct of that actually is, I think it's 12 trillion in global economic value in unlocking employee health correctly. So this idea that this is a nice to have, that this is fluffy data, that, whatever businesses try to pass this off as, and actually, no, this is very, very real, and you're paying for the cost of well-being one way or the other. It's just whether it's silently draining your company or you actually want to invest in it.
Yeah, these are very powerful commentaries indeed. And maybe to zoom in a bit more into what you were talking about, the youth burning out. You said 27-year-olds, the average age of burnout now. The young, what was the average you mentioned?
Yeah, I read that last week. I need to find the study that was in, but yeah, the average age.
When you this is a recurrent comment we often make about looking at the intersectionality of these issues affecting people in the workplace. And in fact, I read a research a couple years ago about how oftentimes burnout affects more women and young people particularly because they're more vulnerable in their position at the workplace. They have less power in regards of hierarchy when it comes to their older peers and stuff like that as well. So yeah, that's I think it's an important thing that we should also keep
women, women of color, Black women. The deeper you dive into the intersectionality, the deeper you see how the inequality of these systems and of these processes. And it's something we speak a lot about at HumanOS is, these one size fits all solutions, as if human beings are one homogenous group. And
We're not.
exactly. And so often these policies are actually widening the gap they're meant to be solving because they're just not accurate and they're just not specific to the individuals who they're actually supposed to be supporting.
Mm-hmm. Moving on, you also talk about presenteeism and people being being physically present but cognitively absent. Why is that such a hidden problem for organizations?
Well, presenteeism is number one. It's really hard to measure. So employers, workplaces, they often traditionally measure things like absenteeism because it's easy to measure physical absence from the workplace. It's easy to see it. It's easy to put a number on it. But presenteeism is often like acting under the surface. People are physically there, but they're cognitively depleted. They're distracted. Like we said, they have no energy. And so because it's similar to anything mental health related, because people physically can't see it, they don't necessarily understand the importance of it. But when you look at costs of the cost of presenteeism and absenteeism in the workplace, actually presenteeism is about 80% of the global cost. It's a huge number. Absenteeism is so small in comparison. And for every cost of absenteeism, presenteeism 5 to 10 times higher. The statistics around it are staggering. But yeah, the reason it is so dangerous is because companies do find it hard to measure and therefore they don't take it seriously. Mm-hmm. But the best way of proving around presenteeism is that engagement piece. 13% in Europe. So if you're a company of 20 people, that's, how many of that? 2 people engaged? It's so small. And that's the best sort of predictor to be able to show that this isn't actually something that's, again, fluff or that is just being created. This is real, tangible, terrifying challenges we are seeing in the workplace today.
From a neuroscience perspective, what actually happens to our ability to think, collaborate, innovate when we operate under chronic stress?
So when we operate under chronic stress, the brain just goes into survival mode. It takes away all the resources from anything outside of what is going to help us survive. Brain is around 300,000 years out of date. It hasn't actually evolved barely at all in that time. But if we think about how much the world has changed over the past 300,000 years and how different the environments are, it's no surprise that our brains are like, what is going on? I don't understand how to compute this. And it's also really important to remember the brain doesn't know the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and 10 p.m. Slack messages and 400 unread emails and a big sales call tomorrow or a missed target. The brain just recognizes fear as fear. We have evolved for what we call a immediate return environment. So what this is you're an ancient hunter-gatherer, you leave your cave and you have to get food, you have to find a mate, you have to find a shelter. That is it. All of these things can be solved relatively instantly. Now, fast forward to these delayed return environments in which we have to think about, how am I going to pay my mortgage? How am I going to get this dream job? How am I going to bring my children up correctly? How am I going to ensure that I can go on this holiday? Because people want these things as well, and it's important, and that's okay. But they can't be solved instantly. And so the brain doesn't know how to process that. So from a neuroscience perspective, our prefrontal cortex, which is like our brain's CEO, in times of high stress, the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in decision-making and understanding and communication, it shuts down because the brain's like, this doesn't help us survive, so we don't need it. And instead, the brain's amygdala, which is our emotional center, which is almost like the brain's security guard, goes into overactivation. Everything becomes a threat. Everything's a trigger. Everything's danger. And so then over time, what happens is the brain starts to go into a very negative state of mind where it's constantly trying to find danger. And that's how a cortisol then builds. And then that's what leads to that sort of gradual low stress state of stress building up to then causing real mental health challenges. And then without going too geeky about it, when that happens, then it sends the signals to the gut. The gut then finds it, recognizes cortisol, and then the gut freaks out, so sends messages back to the brain to say, hey, we're inflamed, and then this cycle just begins and we get stuck in it, and we really have to learn how to break that cycle.
Mm-hmm. I just love how passionate you are about it. And as you were speaking, I was just thinking, if only there was like a way for, while we're at work, for our bodies to like send signals that like, help both managers and like the person working to kind of like push that stop button or that pause button to just come back to center. Yeah. How much better, how much healthier workplaces we would have if we were able to like track this more effectively for ourselves and for people around us as well. Yeah.
I think these are just like crazy numbers. 150 million people, $6 trillion, 13% I think engaged. I think it stops feeling like a workplace problem and it starts really feeling like a systemic one. And that system has never felt, I think, more unstable than it does right now. You mentioned it before, Bianca. The workplace today is full of uncertainty, AI disruptions, layoffs, geopolitical tensions, constant technological changes. And how do you think these broader forces affect the way people experience work on a day-to-day level?
Yeah, well, I guess we kind of alluded to it earlier. It's that when we're in a fear state, when the world feels unsafe, when the world feels unstable, which it does to so many people for so many reasons right now. And let's not forget, like, we only went through a global pandemic 6 years ago, which for so many people was the first time they were actually faced with an understanding that we are not these superhuman beings. So often in life, until we actually go through tragedy and go through grief, we never have this real sense of feeling unsafe. And it's not until that happens either to us or to someone we love and it changes our perception, which is why grief is so transformative and actually can be in a really beautiful way as well. And I do think it's important to mention that. But, the pandemic happened and suddenly for so many people, this was the first time where they were like, wow, I feel really unsafe in this. This is something that I don't know how to deal with, that I've never experienced, that I do not have the tools for. Then you go into everything that we've just like sort of alluded to in terms of what has been the aftermath of that. So there's been a huge amount in a relatively short space of time. And now AI is just like supersonic change at such a scale and such a pace. And the amount of fear in the news and the press and in society. So individuals are already feeling really unsafe, really uncertain. We know we don't do our best work. Psychological safety is the number one predictor of high performance in the workplace. We just look at Google, Aristotle, Google's project that's done between 2012 and 2015. They cross-analysed, I think it was over 180 teams, both high performing, low performing. The number one predictor of high performance every single time, psychological safety. So if you're taking individuals who are not feeling safe in their personal lives, you're putting them into an environment in the workplace where they're also not feeling safe. Let's not even pretend that these two things are separate things anymore. They're not. The lines have become so blurred. And so there's no surprise then that we are then seeing all these issues again come up, because none of these environments are conducive to human flourishing.
Yeah, what you mentioned, like being constantly on guard and in that survival mode state doesn't allow you to deliver your best work. And in your conversations with leaders, how do you see this uncertainty pushing organizations deeper into this survival mode state?
Well, the leaders also are just human beings, right? They might be human beings with a fancier title and a fancier paycheck, but they're still human beings with their own traumas and their own shortcomings and just trying to do their best. And so they're also likely going to be in these fear responses. And I think a big challenge is when we are feeling out of control, we try to grab hold of control even more tightly. So we see leaders and businesses then sort of default into tighter deadlines, more reporting, less flexibility, more surveillance of output, and all of these things that feel rational in the moment, but actually are just going to push both the organizations and the individuals deeper into survival mode, because any one of these things is going to increase the cognitive and emotional load on the people who are already feeling stretched and scared.
Yeah, indeed. And I think many of us can relate, right? If you feel like you're not in control, you're trying to get control in any way possible. So you want to get those signals of commitment of the people working for you. You want to, see that hyper responsiveness because that shows like you're somehow in control or there's something going on that is measurable or actionable in some sense.
Mm.
So yeah, that's definitely very relatable. How can leaders distinguish between, healthy ambition and survival-driven performance?
Yeah, this is a great question. Healthy ambition and survival driven performance. And actually, I would love to see some data around this in the workplace. Like, actually, how many of us are healthily ambitious and how many of us are
Yeah, we
survival?
talked about this a lot actually, right? Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
trauma of
Yeah.
ambition and yeah.
100%. Yeah, I get exactly going deeper into that data. How many people think they are healthily ambitious, and then you look under the lid and actually realize there's not much that is healthy about that ambition. And again, this isn't to shame anyone or judge anyone because I'm definitely one of these people as well, and it's something I'm consciously working on. But it's a great question because it's such a relevant area in society and in the workplace right now. And so I think the way leaders can best distinguish between these two things ultimately comes down to choice. Healthy ambition has an energy behind it. There's a curiosity, there's a forward motion, there's a sense of possibility. The person is choosing to stretch, but they're also not scared to recover. When you look at the most successful, and I use that term very lightly because when I talk about success, I talk about external as much as the internal. For me, you're not successful if you're on a X-figure salary and you've got a cool car and you've got a beautiful house and you've got this really cool career, but you have no fulfillment, no meaning, no empathy, no connection. Like, that's not success to me. To me, success is you have internal peace and you know who you are and you know how you want to show up and you show up with love and kindness. And yes, of course, you can have the cool car if that's what you want and the cool house. Like, will I hopefully have a Ferrari one day? I hope so. But I hope to sit in it with a lot of inner peace in my being as well. So these things don't have to be black or white. But when we do look at the most successful people, top sports people, people at the top of their sort of corporate careers, they understand the game of speed. They understand when do I need to push and when do I need to pull back? When do I need to work hard? When do I need to recover? And they don't ask permission for that recovery. They know that that is what is going to drive them to be able to perform at this level sustainably, week after week, year after year, quarter after quarter, whatever it may be. Survival driven performance, it's the opposite. It might look the same on the surface, but the energy is different. It's coming from a place of fear. The person is performing because they feel like they have to, not because they want to. They aren't giving themselves permission to recover. They're just collapsing when they get in at the end of the day. And so there's less creativity, there's less innovation, there's a shorter fuse. Coming back to what we spoke about when you asked me at the start around, what are those first signs of burnout? You don't have the empathy, you don't have the patience, you're distracted, you're not actually listening to what the human in front of you is speaking about, you're thinking about everything else on your to-do list. And so for me, that's when you've lost that healthy ambition and you've definitely moved into that survival place.
Yeah, beautiful. So leaders can pay attention to who's actually taking time to rest and to recuperate and I guess pay close attention to the energy behind the performance is.
Yeah, exactly. And when you give someone a target, who's excited about that target and who's terrified?
Yeah.
And when things are feeling out of control and problems are happening, because hello, that's life and that's work, of course, and things are going to go wrong, who leans into that discomfort, who has that ability to say, okay, this isn't working out how we want to, but we can overcome this, we can find a solution, and who's quick to adapt and to be flexible and to be agile, and who gets completely derailed and who gets stuck in that victim mentality or gets overwhelmed by the fear. Because again, these are these signs that someone isn't feeling healthy, isn't feeling good, isn't feeling full of energy. They're doing it because they feel like they have to, and they don't have the tools or the energy then to adapt and pivot when things go wrong.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So let's get practical for a moment, because I think a lot of people who are listening aren't necessarily in the position to just, opt out or wait for the organization to change, right? They still have to show up tomorrow. So I'd like for us to kind of like zoom in into what staying engaged without burning out or disengaging actually look like.
Yeah, and when we're looking at the individual and what's right for the individual as well, and often we as human beings, we can be really black and white, and the world doesn't happen in black and white. The world happens in grey. So it's very, very rare that you have cases in which you go from, okay, I'm in this corporate role, in this corporate environment, to I'm going to quit, I'm going to move to the other side of the world, I'm going to follow my dreams. That's just not realistic and not the mindset we should be having. And it doesn't have to be extreme like that. We can definitely take control and take ownership and take agency of our health and of our behaviors and of our energy while still being in these environments that may be challenging. It just really comes down to, number one, like an understanding of yourself, because what works for me won't work for Selma, won't work for Axelle, won't work for whoever may be listening. Like, we're all so different as human beings. There is no one size fits all solution to health and well-being. We live in a society now that glamorizes quick fixes and pills. Go have a 5-minute ice bath to get rid of your anxiety. Go run an Ironman or a High Rocks. Have this new supplement pill. Take this powder, like whatever it might be. Like, human beings we're inherently really lazy, and so if we think we can get somewhere and feel better faster than doing what the reality usually is, which is doing the boring things really, really well, then we're just going to set ourselves up for failure. And I think it's also really important that we demystify this whole like intensity piece. We love intensity over consistency now. And what I mean by that is we have to do 10,000 steps a day. We have to read one book a week. We have to do X many minutes of meditation. We have to eat X many healthy meals. And again, like, it's so rigid and it just sets us up to be disappointed with ourselves. So we really want to be consistent over intense. So for one person, that might be 500 more steps a day. For another, that might be one more healthy meal. But to not overlook the importance of nailing the basics. So, okay, you're feeling really overstretched, you're feeling really overwhelmed, you're feeling really, really anxious, you're going into an environment that isn't conducive to your well-being tomorrow. But okay, outside of that, what do you have energy for? What can you take control over? And depending where you're at in that bracket as well, which is going to be individual, like for someone that might just be, I just have enough energy to get out and walk around the block without my phone first thing in the morning. And that's all I can manage right now. Then great. Start with that, because that's amazing. For someone else, it might be, actually, yeah, I'm going to go and try and do a new gym class, or I'm going to try this new healthy recipe, or I'm going to try and ensure that I actually take time to see these people who love me, or to make sure we don't have phones at dinner tonight. To actually invest in your connection and your relationships, because that's often one of the first things that go when we don't have energy, but it's so important to our energy. So again, there's no one size fits all, but there's always things within our control, and it's not sexy and it's not fun and it's not going to change overnight, but these are the things that then actually start to make the biggest difference over time.
Yeah, indeed. And I think you're a good example of that. I follow you on Instagram and I see all your, healthy habits. So that reminds us all of like all the things that we can do to keep ourselves centered. And looking at that, sometimes it reminds me of that, Lady Gaga meme when she goes like, bus, club, other club.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It seems like your day is like so full of all these healthy habits.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to find that and post that now, aren't I? It's so funny. Yeah, and like, that's what works for me, because I'm in a position now where I have a 1-year puppy, 50-kilo puppy, which is no joke. I'm running a tech startup. I'm delivering talks. I'm on podcasts. So I have a very regimented life. And so my habits have to be really minute on minute at the moment, because that's the period of my life I'm in. But also I identify as these things now. So these things are no longer hard to me. I identify as someone who trains 5 or 6 times a week. I identify as someone who eats well. I identify as someone who sleeps for 8 hours, 9 hours a night, ideally. These make me feel good. And so these have become natural things, but this isn't where everyone is going to be at. So it's like, what are those low hanging fruits that you want to start? And I really believe that there's no way that I would now have the resilience I have and the uncertainty I have if I didn't have this self-discipline. And I think self-discipline is so much more important than self-motivation, but self-compassion is even more important than that. And so there's no point eating all your vegetables, moving your body, meditating, reading, whatever you are, if you're just being horrible to yourself in between that. Like, the most important conversation you'll ever have is the one between your 2 ears. And so if that's not a conversation that's kind and loving and compassionate and protective, then the rest is irrelevant. And I think that was the thing I found hardest to do, and the thing I promote for others to be what they're most intentional with.
Yeah, beautiful. These are such great coping strategies, for us as individuals and employees. But what responsibility do leaders have in making sustained engagement actually possible?
Yeah, for sure. And again, this is another great question. And we actually did an entire white paper a couple of years ago saying, I think it's called Who's Responsible for Wellbeing Anyway? And it talked about this differentiation between the organization and the individual. And so leaders have an enormous responsibility. The meeting cadence, the workload distribution, the norms around availability, equality, equity, that the environment created and curated, and what those systems are rewarding. Are they rewarding survival, because you'll get survival, or are they rewarding sustainability, and then you get sustainability? That being said, however, it is not on the leader to make the individual take ownership. So yes, the leader in the organization has to create the environment in which the individual can flourish, but at the end of the day, the individuals are then responsibility for taking ownership of their actions. And it has to be both. It has to be these two things working together.
Yeah, that makes sense. And from your work with organizations, what are some structural conditions that help teams out of survival mode? I think you spoke in the article that the three of us wrote together about 4 in particular. I think
so we had psychological safety, which we've spoke about today, and the importance of that. People feeling safe to speak honestly, challenge ideas, admit when they're struggling, without this fear of punishment or negative consequences. There's also an element in here of people feeling seen and valued and heard. Really easy, sort of free, practical tips here can be something as simple as like reducing power gaps. And so flattening hierarchies within meetings, using first names, creating shared norms. So setting behavioral expectations. This is how we debate. This is how we listen. This is how we disagree. Like, conflict's not a bad thing, but it has to be done in a healthy manner, in the correct way. Role modeling. We know that employees under high performing leaders are 4.5 times more likely to be high performers. So what does that role modeling look like in the workplace? Addressing problematic behavior. How many times have we all been in a workplace where we've just, contradiction erodes trust, and they say one thing in the handbook, there's one thing on the kitchen wall, and then actually what you see in a day-to-day life of that office is entirely different. That's your number one way to make people feel unsafe. I think we had clarity, which is a really important one. So particularly in a world that's moving so fast and people feeling so unstable, we need to be really clear. We need to communicate really, really well. Ambiguity is exhausting. And again, we'll know this inside and outside the workplace. When people aren't clear and just say what they need to say and say it in a way that we can easily understand it, it's exhausted because our brains will just try and play out so many scenarios to try and understand. And that's just such a waste of time and energy for everyone. So people want to know what's expected. We have to reduce that like background anxiety drain. We know through the research that poor communication is one of the top drivers of workplace stress, disengagement, turnover. So again, what are we doing as workplaces to train our individuals to actually be able to communicate effectively? And if you know as a workplace, this is something your managers or leaders or people struggle with, how are you then training them on those emotionally intelligent based skills so people can have good quality conversations, so people aren't scared to have difficult conversations, but they're had in the right way. Recovery, we spoke about in the article. So trying to move into this mentality of human performance operating in cycles. No one can perform at 110%, 110% of the time. It's just not realistic. We need to know, like I said earlier, when to speed up, when to slow down. So how are we designing these work systems so teams are working together as opposed to like this individual type culture that's effectively just going to be leading to burnout? Thinking about us again as individuals, how much part of our day do we actually just stop to rest, aside from when we end up back in bed at the end of the day? Like, how many of us have actually had a moment in that day where we're not on our devices, we're not answering an email, we're not ruining our brains with dopamine rot from social media, in the gyms, eating, whatever it might be? Actually, how are we implementing different types of rest? Physical rest, emotional rest, spiritual rest, social rest, creative rest. Like there's 7 types of rest, and it's just not part of our daily lives now in the modern world. And then we wonder why we are as exhausted as we are. And then connection. And like I said, this is often one of the first things that goes when we're exhausted, but it's just so important. We have entire neuroendocrine systems that respond to physical touch. We are social creatures. We have always been part of a group. And so loneliness is a very, very real issue. 18 to 24-year-olds are 3 times more lonely than over 65-year-olds. Loneliness is increasing at exponential rates. So how are we ensuring as workplaces we are actually making people feel connected again, that they feel like they belong, that they feel valued, and that they can align as individuals and their values and the businesses and their values?
What you're describing puts a real responsibility on leaders, not just on individuals trying to cope, right? Because you can give people all the frameworks in the world, but if the environment doesn't change, it only goes so far. Which brings me to the bigger question, what does this mean for the future of work itself, right? If leaders continue designing workplaces that reward survival mode, what do you think the long-term consequences will be?
I mean, I think we're already seeing, and the fact that the engagement is where it is, like how much worse can it get? Organizations are going to keep losing good people, top performers. We live in a world now that is so disposable. Individuals no longer need to join one company and be there for 50 years. They don't even need to be in the same industry. So organizations and leaders are going to continue to lose the people that they rely on if they don't actually wake up to the realities of what the modern workplace should look like and modernize their structures and their systems in line with that.
Yeah. And so on that other side, what becomes possible when organizations design work around human capacity rather than the constant urgency?
Yeah. And this is super relevant. And I was reading the data that came out of Davos at the World Economic Forum this year, and it was highlighting how there's a growing sense of societal rupture, inequality, anxiety, AI disruption, everything we sort of spoke about today, declining trust. And the leaders called for putting humans at the forefront of conversations again, and for deeper investment in people. And there's a reason that why this stuff is being mentioned at Davos and the World Economic Forum, and it's in all the research right now, because as soon as we start putting humans back at the forefront of these conversations again, we start to claim back everything that survival mode has taken. So creativity, genuine engagement, genuine connections, the ability to think long term, having the energy to problem solve and to innovate and to put effort into things because we enjoy putting effort into things, because we enjoy working hard, because we understand why we're working hard. Because let's be honest, like, individuals aren't lazy. They just don't believe that it's worth the effort they have to put in because the environments are so broken. And so if we actually start designing around human capacity once again, we can start to unlock human potential once again. And organizations fear that this is going to make people do less, and actually all it's going to do is make people do more, and performance is going to increase and engagement is going to increase and presenteeism will start to disappear once again. And it's so fundamental to the way the working world needs to be going.
Mm-hmm. Finally, if someone listening recognizes themselves in the conversation we had, what is one small shift they could make this week to protect their energy at work?
Again, like, I would not want to give like a one size fits all response to this. So what I would say that can be applicable to anyone is be curious. I think there is so much power in curiosity. And to be curious doesn't mean we have to change anything, doesn't mean we have to do anything differently. There's no pressure around curiosity, but it does mean that we can potentially start opening up our minds to a different way of thinking, a different way of being, a different way of serving ourselves. And so I would say, like, just be curious to what's triggering you. Be curious to what's causing you tension. Be curious to what works in your environment, what doesn't. And then just start to be curious as to what that could mean.
Mm-hmm. That's already a huge pointer, I think, for all of us. Thank you. So what stays with me from this conversation is something you said early on, Bianca, that kind of like to summarize it, that survival mode is so hard to spot because it's so good at looking like, success or high performance. And I think that's what makes it so dangerous, right? Not the moments wherein we're visibly falling apart, but the long stretch where everything still gets done and nobody, including ourselves, thinks to stop and ask at what cost. And so we should be curious to ask ourselves at what cost. Bianca, thank you for bringing both the data and the honesty today, and for reminding us that designing work around human capacity isn't idealistic. It might just be the most practical thing we can do. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.